this is Erin with Cornell Studio Supply, located in the Gem City of Dayton, Ohio. We are a proud sponsor of this episode and the Brickyard Network. Join us June 21st to 23rd with a hands-on workshop with Simon Levin and participate in a rocket kiln wood firing with Lisa Orr. Visit cornellstudiosupply.com to sign up. We are happy to help you with all your pottery and ceramic sculpture needs with the best customer service and world-class workshops. At Cornell Studio Supply, we are owned and operated for potters by potters.
Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com.
Welcome back to episode 511 of the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Today on the show, I'm talking with Stephanie Seguin, who is a functional potter based in Helena, Montana. She's also the education manager at the Archie Bray Foundation, where she has helped shape the education program as the Bray has emerged from the pandemic. In our interview, we talk about tactile learning, the development of her work, and the series that she started at the Bray called Artist Amplified. The next installment of that series is this week, and it features Joanna Powell. That's happening May the 16th at 6:30 Mountain Time. You can find out more, including the Zoom links for that, at archiebray.org. You can also check out her work on Instagram or on her website. That's Stephanie-Seguin-Ceramics. I also wanted to take a minute and talk about our fund drive. We are celebrating 12 years of the podcast in the month of May. If you'd like to make a donation, I would certainly appreciate your support. You can do that a couple of different ways, one of which is to go to talesofaredclayrambler.com/donate, where you'll find the PayPal portal. You can also become a sustaining member on Patreon, where you can make a one-time or an ongoing donation at patreon.com/redclayrambler. For new patrons, there are all sorts of perks, including merch, as well as access to the Tales from the Vault podcast feed, which features episodes that are no longer available on major podcast apps. As always, thanks for listening and being a part of this Red Clay Rambler community, and also for your donations. So without further ado, we'll get to the interview. So I thought we would start talking about being a tactile learner, because I've seen you reference that when writing about yourself, and also when you were interviewed for a magazine article I had that I had read. What do you think about that? Like, do you think being a tactile learner is a subset of the human experience, or do you think that's just you?
No, I think it's definitely a human experience. And it's probably something that for some people it's more heightened than for others, but I think to some degree it's for everyone. For me, it's very critical. Like, it is something that from early on, it's how I have learned best. In my early academic career, I struggled significantly. K through 12, I think, was fine, through fourth grade math tables. That's where all of a sudden, times tables, that's like where it went downhill for me. Most of elementary was fine. Middle school got a little weird. And then high school just really struggled. Barely made it through it. Once I got to college, where all of a sudden I remember in particular, it was an intro English class. the professor got up and he basically said, here's the deal. You get to show up. You get to do what you want. I hope that you care. I hope that you learn. I'm here to help support you learn. But ultimately, if you don't want to come, you don't have to come. Your grade's going to reflect it, but it's on you. And right then and there, I was like, oh, you're not forcing me to do anything. It's on me. I have that responsibility. It shifted everything about how I was going to learn and how I was going to approach learning. And then also, I mean, a big shift was I was able to have studio classes and I was able to have my hands on in the majority of my learning process. And so being able to have tactile learning be a major part of my learning experience made everything else so much more tangible for me. And to this day, that's a huge part of my process as a person, not just in my creative process, but in my life as well. When there are periods that I'm not in my studio, whether it's I've decided I need a break or, other parts of my life, work gets too demanding that I'm not able to get to the studio, I notice that my life and my work outside of the studio is negatively impacted. Because through working with my hands, that's where I'm able to get into a flow state easily. And maybe that's the only area, quite honestly, that I'm able to get into a flow state. And then so through that flow state, you can start to think clearly on ideas that you're working on, not just, if I'm making a vessel and working with coils, it's not just figuring out that form that I'm working on. Or if I'm glazing a pot, it's not just figuring out how I'm applying that glaze just the way I want, but it also allows my mind to figure out like, oh gosh, I have a solution to this problem that we've been trying to solve related to this grant that we've been trying to figure out. How do we incorporate the budget that we've been trying to figure out? How does this fit into this, right? Or there's a personnel issue that's going on and it's been bugging me that I can't figure out how to come to a solution here. And all of a sudden, through just kind of working with my hands and working with the materials, you hit this kind of like a zen or a flow, or it's kind of hard to describe, but I think all makers experience it. And your mind is able to like free the space. It like loses all the clutter. And through that tactile experience, like the learning is just like the doors open, the floodgates kind of open.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know, 5 years ago, I really got into Radio Lab. Have you ever listened to that podcast? Yeah. And they were doing a deep dive on the way that our brains process information. And I can't remember which episode it was, but they're essentially talking about the more senses you engage, the more you allow your brain to maximize the way you learn. So for us as artists, like that makes total sense. And it also is confusing to me how people can learn not in a tactile way. People that can just read a book and get the information. I've never been like that. So in a way, like a tactile learner, I think we have self-selected to be in this ceramics community based on being a tactile learner or tactile learners.
Well, and I also think when I'm working with my hands, that's when I'm able to absorb information too. So whether that be I'm working on something and rehashing a conversation or rehashing a problem like I was talking about before, but also that might be when I'm listening to a podcast or listening to a book on tape or watching a documentary. And I'm able to absorb that information and it sticks so much better for me because I'm working with my hands. The same way in meetings, I'm someone who takes notes because I need to be doing something with my hands. If I just sit there, like part of it is it's nice to have notes to refer back to, but a lot of it is I need to actually be doing something physical with my hands. And then too, I'm a real big believer in teaching with this idea that if you're like this kind of hand, mind, eye connection, so it's good to have the idea, to draw or write the idea and then see that idea. And then you kind of have like this cycle between the hand, the eye, and the mind. And then you can have a better sense of creating it. And even if it's the roughest sketch you've ever done and it looks terrible and it's nothing quite like you were thinking, there's at least this process that has started that you can then take to the making part. Um, Coming back a little bit to the radio lab, the episode that you mentioned, to springboard off of that, there's also one that I think was more recent where they talk about how the older you get, the faster time goes. And for years, I have felt like, okay, I really feel like time is going faster the older I get. And I swear it's because little kids, like, they're learning things so rapidly. Like, everything that they're doing is brand new. And I mean, and it came to me because I saw this kid at a dinner party once, and they were just rifling this person's kitchen. And I thought, oh my gosh, if that was my kitchen, I would be so upset. But the person whose house it was didn't care at all. They had had kids of their own. They were really lovely, generous hosts. But I was amazed because this kid, you could see this world expanding with every cupboard. They were like, whoa, what is in here? And it was the coolest thing to see this child's like world expanding. And I was like, wow, that's why every day is so long when you're younger, because everything is new. And I wonder if that's why when we get older, it's not as long because we've kind of done it all before. And I felt so confirmed when I heard this Radio Lab episode because they more or less touch on that idea. But I think that's also part, like, coming back to the studio. That's why being in the studio can be so important, because you're working through new ideas, you're doing new stuff, you're learning new things. It feels like it's expanding our worlds a little bit as we're processing new ideas. And so I think that is another kind of key component of that tactile learning that feels so critical for me.
There's something about skill that ties into this where if I'm making a new body of work, or let's say a form where I've made one, but let's say I've never decorated it. So I'm decorating it for the first time. Often that first idea, the decoration and the form actually look pretty great. It's almost like beginner's luck, like I'm just hit the note right off. And then I'll try to repeat it in the second, third, fourth, or fifth. They suck. Like there's something about like you lose that,
Yeah.
that really goodness. But then if you keep going and you get to like the 20th one, or maybe you make it a month after, so there's been some time that's elapsed, then there's something that clicks in again. And it's weird that the first one and the 20th one are the good ones. Like, I don't know why that happens.
Yeah. There's something to one, intuition, but also not overthinking things. And so with the first one, there's a bit of like the intuitiveness. You've kind of tried something. There's not too much weight put on it because you're experimenting, or you've got an idea and you're putting it out there. You hope it turns out good, but you have nothing to compare it against. The next couple, you really liked the one, so you're comparing it against that. You're always trying to achieve it, and oh no, it's not going to work. Um, but also, I'm kind of excited you brought this up because it's touching on something that I just, on a recent conference trip that I took, spent some time thinking about outside the conference when I was visiting some museums and looking at some Bouchon pottery and a couple of other artworks that I was just really loving. I spent some time with a Helen Frankenthaler piece, which I always love her work, but I just had some like really special a special 15 minutes with this particular piece alloy of hers. When you get to that 20th and so on work, it starts to like get to this point of there's a simplicity in making a skill look easy, like something that's challenging and complex look effortless. And that's so special when you get there. It's so, so good, right? Like the Bouchon pottery, what I love about it is there's always like a little wonk to it. There's always something that's like a little loose. And I adore that. Like, it's so special to me that, whoever made those could have made those the tightest pots possible, but they didn't. And I love that. That like is just like it makes me swoon, because it's just like there's such a effortlessness to it, and there's a casualness, and it feels, I don't know, like there's something about that. Like when people are so skillful that they make something really hard look super easy, that's good. That's really good. And it's so hard. It's so hard to get there. But I think that is like what that 1 and 20 kind of looks like. And then everything in between is where most of us are most of the time. And that's maybe like in clay, especially, I feel like that's where people can get bit by the clay bug, right? You hear that expression a lot because once you have that one, that's it. It's all over. You're in it. You're here for the long run. You're trying to get to that number 20 and you'll get there. We all do.
If we had some like magical time machine, I would love to be able to go through museums and know like, oh, that sculpture is the 5th version that artist made. You know, or like with the buncheong pots, like they actually made 12 of those that day. And you're just happened to see that one. Because this was this in Minneapolis? Was this at the Walker?
So the Helen Frankenthaler was at the Walker, and then the Bouchon pottery was at the MIA, the Minneapolis Institute of Art. Yeah, they have an incredible ceramic collection.
Amazing.
So good. Yeah.
I've go there for their digital collection is also really good. So a lot of people can see some of these pots online. Did you grow up in Minnesota? Where did you grow up?
So I always say I'm from the Minneapolis area, but I'm from Hudson, Wisconsin.
Okay.
Which is on the border of Wisconsin and Minnesota. And I say the Minneapolis area because if I say Wisconsin, people think Madison, Milwaukee, which is on the other side of the state. So I spent a lot of time in the Twin Cities. And it was a great place to grow up. Great museums, lots of wonderful things going on there, and amazing ceramic culture that I had no idea about while I was there and growing up there. Learned about it all after the fact, but I still have family there, so I get to go back and enjoy it now.
I was the same way. I grew up near Floyd, Virginia, but didn't know any of the 16 hands potters when I was in high school, when I was first learning. And then I went to college and everyone kept saying like, oh, you must have worked with everyone in Floyd. And of course I didn't. I'd never even been there at that point. I mean, I'd been to the town, but not the potters. But Minneapolis, I mean, you've got the museums, like you said. Also, I noticed so many concerts go there. Like almost all tours go through that. That's like a big, Midwest hub.
So that I did do.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah,
nice.
That I did do. I was a music goer when I was younger. I went to First Ave a lot and way too many bars when I was young. Like I'm sure it's still happening, but there were so many like 16 plus and 18 plus nights, and I went to way too many bars at a young age. Definitely of like
what kind of
fake
shows?
ID generation. I was a real kind of like a rocker metalhead at the time, which is like a little unusual, I guess, if like you see me and know me now. I'm much more of a folk person now, but every once in a while it still comes out. Yeah.
Did you have a mohawk?
No, but like I did, had all the different hair colors and multiple colors at once, and stretched my ears for a little while. And my parents, I think, were just grateful when I graduated high school and agreed to go to college. And like I said, first year of college, the second I don't like being in boxes. I'm not good at that. I'm not being good. I joke with my nieces and nephews who are now getting old enough that they're young adults. But I'm like, you guys, you're Seguins. We're stubborn. It's what we do. And my dad doesn't like to hear that, but he doesn't agree that we're stubborn. He says we are absolutely not. But
that's the most stubborn
case
thing
in
ever.
Point. Yes. Yep. But yeah, if you tell me what to do, I will do the absolute opposite. But got to college and was just like, oh, I'm in control of my life. Let's do it. Let's do great things. So yeah.
Well, I think creating your own box it goes back to that conversation about learning in the way you learn best, but having some parameters to help you learn, I think is essential. And clay gives us some of those, like temperature, the way materials work, all of that. But as you went through college and then ultimately to Penn State for grad school, how have you been able to create the box or the parameters that work well for you, that don't feel restrictive, but feel helpful?
That's a really good question. And I don't know how outwardly intentional it's been. I feel like I'm a very intentional person, but I don't know if I ever sat down and thought, I'm going to strategize right now. Instead, it tends to be, let's do this thing. And then let's reflect and observe what worked, what didn't. I'm going to adjust this now and move forward. One thing I really did is, so in undergrad, it really, and I think most undergrad experiences are like this. It's all about building the foundational skills. And I had an incredible undergrad experience. Kelly Sinner was my instructor, and she was amazing. She just really built every assignment that it included, like a technical building, a technical surface, and a conceptual component. And then as we got more advanced, it also included like a kiln component, whether that be learning to fire, a different firing temperature, a different atmosphere. So I had this incredibly rich and well-rounded technical background and kind of craft of the material background. And then from undergrad, I really took this approach of, I want to go explore and I want to travel. But I feel like I was pretty practical about it. And I thought, I'm going to get jobs in places that I want to explore. And I'm going to do that with clay. And so the first place that was in Montana, apprenticeship in Whitefish, Montana, Whitefish Pottery. And so that got me out to Montana for just under a year. Oh, no, it was a full year. And then from there, I went to St. John for a studio assistant, basically, and I taught down there. And then it took me to Italy and back to Montana, and Montana kind of became my kind of landing pad in between all of my different places that I was going to do different short-term gigs. But every opportunity I took and applied for, I really was trying to expand my understanding of what was possible in the field and grow my resume, grow my experience, grow my knowledge in the field and in the material at the same time. And so I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think that ultimately was my strategy. And that was me learning to kind of figure out, like, what is my box? What feels good to me? Like, what are the different avenues and what's fitting, what's not, what makes sense? And through all of that, I just kept like a running list of notes of like, at this place, this worked really well. This didn't work really well. So if I ever do this, I'm going to make sure to remember this, this, and this. And here also is what I learned about my work and the direction I want my work to go. And sometimes it would really pendulum, and other times it would narrow and focus. And then sometimes it would blow wide open, and I all of a sudden would be doing something completely different. But inevitably, I would kind of come back to, I mean, and ultimately it is 100% guided my work and my career to where it is today. One step has inevitably led to the other.
Yeah, and I think this is my question. Has figuring that out for yourself helped you shape the education department at the Bray? Because you're the manager of the education department, which in a practical sense means you have a building and then you get to shape the educational experiences in that building. So how does what you're doing now at the Bray relate to you figuring these things out for yourself?
Yeah. I mean, I think I've definitely used my experiences to inform the experience that I'm now creating for others, and my experience within my job as well. The list of notes, 100% informed the work that I'm doing here now. My job at the Bray, when I saw the listing for it, I remember looking at it and thinking like, okay, yeah, this is work that I can do, and check. I could fill that role. And so I applied and felt fortunate to get an interview. And in the first interview, Steve was our director at the time, and he asked the question, if you could rethink education in the field of ceramics, what would it look like? And all of a sudden it went from like, oh, I would like to apply for this job and, maybe hold it for a few years and see where it goes. All of a sudden it switched from that to like, whoa, this could be a real opportunity here. And this could be kind of a dream experience. And so, and the reason that question was asked is because it was still during the pandemic at this point. And so the Bray was in a prolonged closure and was in this rare opportunity to say, like, we can shift our thinking here. We don't have to continue the models we've continued before. What if we were to shift things, what could it look like? And so I really tried to utilize very intentionally the multitude of experiences that I gained at all the different craft centers and art centers and institutions that I had so intentionally tried to gain all this different experience at, and really take into account. I really loved working for this type of person. I really didn't like working for this type of person. I saw people really thrive in this environment, and I saw people do okay in this environment. But and actually in this section of it, they did really well, but in this section they didn't. And this program was incredibly successful, but I don't know if it fits for what this demographic where we live is, but it might work for this type of programming here, and really just kind of puzzle it all together, and then look at all of the pieces that make up the Bray, which is like a huge picture. There's so much to consider, and it's been a real exciting creative adventure, I suppose. It's kind of taken over a large part of my creative process, at least the initial kind of reimagining of the program here at the Bray. And now we're coming up on 2 years into the new approach to education at the Bray. And we have a new director now too. Rebecca Harvey is now our executive director. And so it feels like a great time to start to closely look at, okay, what has worked really well so far? What should we look at refining? And also, how are we now poised to kind of utilize our strengths and leverage those to what's next, which is a really exciting place to be.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. The collection exists as an online resource for research and inspiration, featuring photos of over 4,000 objects made by over 1,000 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great resource for students and teachers. To find out more, visit rosenfieldcollection.com.
The Bray Clay business is your best source for Bray epoxy, a 2-part moldable epoxy intended for post-firing repairs. Working like clay, it's easy to shape, texture, fill gaps, and recreate missing parts. Bray epoxy is sold in tan, white, and black base colors, and we also have a 9-color kit that will allow you to perfectly disguise your repair. Order online anytime at archiebrayclay.com.
One of the things that you and I talked about at some point was that, you have the education building at the Bray, which was always been used for, or a building similar to that was used for classes. But you realized that if you maxed out the classes, like every class was full, every time slot was full, that still wouldn't be, one, financially that great, because there's so much work that just is taken to, fire the pots, make the glazes, all that. But then also, because Helena is somewhat of a small town, having just a maximum number of people in the class might not actually be what Helena needs. So at that point, you started thinking about Helena, but also bigger. So can you talk about sort of that realization about the amount of students relative to who was being served?
Yeah. Well, and part of that came down to as well, wanting to maximize our reach and include it was important that we didn't necessarily turn anyone away, right? Including not allowing anyone in the door in the first place. So it was about reaching people that we haven't reached before, while not making people feel that have been with us for a long time that they weren't able to continue to come to be with us. And so the trick of walking that line was, how do we build new programming that is kind of is a roof or umbrella for as many different abilities, types of students, and backgrounds as possible, all at the same time, and encouraging the people who have been with us for a really long time to come with us for what's next. And I want to make sure to give major props to my predecessor, Lindsay Carroll, who did an incredible, like, I can't believe the amount of work that she had to do to like make the place operate how it operated before the pandemic, because they were maximizing the space for classes and getting people through the door in the local Helena community, and with workshops and what have you. And I have no idea how they it was like such a lift. And I am so impressed with it. And I'm grateful that that's not my objective. So really looking at what were some new models that we could look at, and trying to be innovative about it, trying to think about like, well, what hasn't been done before or what's being done elsewhere that works really well, but thinking about how we could adjust it to make it a Bray model that makes sense for what we're doing, how for the people that we are able to reach realistically. We're in the middle. We're a little bit in the middle of nowhere. It's harder to get here. It's expensive to get here. We're not entirely set up like other places are. We don't have we don't have extensive housing on campus. We don't have great public transportation in Helena. Ubers are hit and miss, so you kind of do have to have a vehicle. It's not absolutely required, but it becomes challenging. So we have certain things that we have to face as a reality for us. So thinking through all of that, I'm going off on a little bit of a challenge here and kind of losing my train of thought, but all of these things are things that are an ongoing kind of circle as I and we are developing programming closed for so long.
One of the programs that you started is Artist Amplified, which is a speaker / demonstration / presentation series. It takes a lot of different forms, but can you talk about what your concept is for the larger series?
Yeah, so Artist Amplified is for artists and art enthusiasts to present on their conceptual motivations, or essentially anything that is providing a new perspective to the general public or to whoever is tuning in. I designed it so that it is a flexible program, a flexible format, I should say. So I invite the presenters, and I always try to make sure it's a fairly well-rounded, so that we have some artists, we have some art enthusiasts, and some people that are sometimes just loosely related to the arts, coming to talk about their specialties. And depending on what they're interested in talking about dictates kind of what the format is going to be. So sometimes it is a traditional slide talk. That's actually pretty rare at this point. I think people are more excited about having something a little more engaging, and that's great. If they want to give a slide talk, we let them give a slide talk. That can be also really interesting. What is tending to be the most popular format of our presenters is kind of a casual, rotating slideshow conversation meets demonstration, where they and another are demonstrating something on the table in front of them, whether it's their artwork or tonight we actually haven't, when we're recording this, have an Artist Amplified, and we have a local florist and event planner and a clay artist presenting together, and the florist is going to demonstrate how to arrange flowers in handmade vases to both showcase the flowers, but also the vases that they're displayed in. And the feeling is that it'll help the consumers of the vases show off their vases, but also artists who might want to document their work or exhibit their work. And then we had Timothy Gordon, who is an art appraiser, come, and we had 3 items from the Bray's permanent collection out on pedestals, and he talked about his amazing career, which included collections like the Jim Morrison's writings and Princess Diana's ball gowns, amongst he also did Francis Senska's estate, but then he also did a live appraisal of the Bray's permanent collection pieces. So it was a really cool thing. So it runs the gamut, and it's a really fun platform, or Ben, what do we call this program? It's a really fun program for that reason, because it varies every time, depending on who's presenting. And I don't know. I always kind of say it's like everything at the Bray. It's casual but professional. It's
That's the Montana way.
it's very approachable for people. Yeah.
Well, how can people be a part of that if they're in the region or even broader?
So if you're in Helena, you can come on down. We've got in-person viewing, but if you aren't in Helena, you can tune in. We live stream them all. And so you can find the links on our website, on our events pages. Also, there's a page dedicated to Artists Amplified. We also share the link in our newsletter, and you can find it on our social media page.
I wanted to switch gears away from the Bray, or away from your position, and talk about the evolution of your work. So you mentioned that you had worked in Whitefish, which is, that pottery is like, you're making a lot of pots, like it is high volume scenario. But then I look at your work, like the way your work has evolved over time, and you don't necessarily fit into what I think of as an apprenticeship model, meaning like you're not just cranking out work, like you're making work that is well considered, influenced by design, looks good in interiors. Like it seems like your considerations have maybe changed over time from the folk potter perspective to what you're making now. Can you talk about what you're interested in with pots and how that shifted over time?
I've always been a maker who's kind of worn two hats at once. And more or less, it's been like tableware and vesselware. And then depending on where I've been at in my kind of making trajectory, sometimes it's more sculptural, sometimes it's more installation based. But pots have always been present for me. And my time at Whitefish Pottery, I was coming out of undergrad, and honestly, I wanted to travel. And so I was like, let's go to Montana. That sounds great. Here's a job. Let's see if I get it. Um, and why not? I wanted experiences. I wanted to try new things, and I was willing and interested in kind of doing and trying it all. So that worked out for me, and I learned a lot. So that was really good. I'm also someone who loves efficiency. So seeing how a production studio runs, I'm now grossly efficient, and it's obnoxious and I have to knock it off sometimes. It's a problem, but yeah, tableware for me, it's something that I kind of, no matter how far away I get from it, I always come back to it. And I think for a really long time, I used the excuse of, yeah, well, as an artist, you have to make some sales, and that's a good way to do it. But it always felt kind of like a dirty excuse. And I'm like, it doesn't fit right. It doesn't sound quite right. I don't know if I should really be saying that. And then recently, I was giving a kind of a mini lecture at a university, and I shared that with the students because someone asked, and I was like, oh, I really hate to share that with young students who are learning to make work. And so I started to give another reason, more so as an excuse, so that they didn't feel like, oh, I need to make work to sell. But the reasoning I gave actually felt much better. And so I think this might be a truer answer. This is my really long way of getting there for you. But the reality is I really do. I like to plan. I like to host events. I like to host people. And so I think I like to have conversations. I like to ask questions. I like to be in dialogue with people. And so I feel like tableware is like the clay version of that, right? Because you're bringing people to the table. You're like putting on events. I love to have a dinner party. I don't necessarily love to go to a dinner party, but I love to host a dinner party. If it's the right dinner party, I love to go. But sometimes it can put a lot of pressure on like someone who's a little more introverted. But I love hosting a dinner party, and I will do it up if I can. And so tableware just makes a lot of sense. You're bringing people together, and then in a lot of ways, I think that plays into the vesselware too, because while sometimes the vesselware I've done has been much more sculptural, the reality is the vessels I've made have always been very like of the domestic space. They feel as though they belong in a home. And in a domestic space in a home, that's where conversations are. That's where people are coming together. And so I think it all is kind of culminating in the same way. And this is a newer discovery, that I'm a newer observation, I should say, that I'm making of my work. And so it's something I'm excited to kind of dive into a little bit further and be more intentional about, related to the conversation around the work and I don't think it's just about bringing people together. That's not it. I think it's more about the questions and the nuanced conversations, maybe. I don't quite know. I'm still figuring it out. It's part of the intuitive making learning experience.
I wanted to end talking about St. John.
Yeah.
We have both spent a lot of time in St. John, and in a staff meeting the other day, you were telling about the worst car that you had ever had, and you were describing having I think it was a Suzuki.
Yeah.
In St. John, and I have seen thousands of those cars in St. John trying to struggle up those hills.
Yes.
Trying to make it places. So can you just talk about what your job was at in St. John, and then just about living on the island for a couple years and what that was like?
Yeah. Can I tell you a little bit more about my Suzuki?
Yes, for sure.
Just, you mentioned the struggling up the hills, because I think in the staff meeting, I talked about going down the hills and how terrifying that could be, because my brakes weren't great. But in particular, there was one hill, and I remember picking up my some of my family members, and they brought way too much luggage. And I was like, you guys, you have no idea what my car is capable of and not capable of. And we're going up this particularly large switchback. And I was like, everyone lean forward. And they all laughed. And I'm like, I am not kidding. Lean forward, or you will be getting out and walking up this hill. We may not make it. We made it, but we struggled. Anyway, I loved that vehicle, even though it was the worst car I ever had. Yeah. So my job down on St. John, I worked with Gail Vandy Borgo, best boss I ever had in my entire life. She's a wonderful human. At the time, I worked at Maho Bay Clay Works at the Maho Bay Eco Camps. They're no longer there, but Maho Bay is still incredibly beautiful. Definitely go check it out. The studio is now located in Coral Bay, St. John Pottery Inc., run by Gail and Casey Giacchis, a dear friend of mine. Amazing place. I'll give it all the shout outs and promo I can get because they're awesome. I've gone down and taught workshops and helped them out in various ways before, like done kind of studio helping out every once in a while. But I went down for a year or for a season. I went down for a season, and I was a studio assistant and a primary teacher. And so I got a lot of my teaching chops for what we call our experience classes here at the Bray. Places everywhere call them different things, but basically like a 2-hour activity class. And so at Maho Bay Clay Works, they were offered for the guests of the camp, and people could sign up to take a 2-hour clay class. And I think sometimes we would run as many as like 4 or 5 a week if it was a really busy week. And sometimes it would just be 1 or 2 a week. But I think it was 8 students at a time. And I got so good at teaching these classes and learning how to manage a class of 8 beginners. And, oh, you're going to want to do this at this time and this at this time. And it was an incredible teaching tool for me to learn how to teach beginning wheel from there on out. And I'm honing on those skills. And along with that, I was able to propose and teach, like 6-week classes or 8-week classes to their regular studio members. And then I also helped with some production pottery, which was nothing close to the production pottery that we were doing at a full-blown production studio like Whitefish Pottery. And then helping load kilns and process reclaim, mix glazes. It was an incredible experience. I hung out with the lizards that were just chilling every once in a while. The cockroaches were hiding in the tactile box. I also, several years after this was a really, really cool experience. Gail had written a grant, and I was invited down to help fulfill this grant. It was with the Friends of the National Parks, and we got to recreate some of the Afro-Caribbean pottery that was found on St. John to be on display for the public viewing, because with the salt water, they didn't want to display the actual artifacts. And so Gail and I got to work with one of the archaeologists of the park and go down into the vaults and look at and handle the artifacts. And then I think she sourced the clay, and we did different testings, and we tried out different slips and tried to be as accurate as possible, and found, could it be this sea fan? Could it be this volcanic rock? Could it be that we tried to find the different shells and textures that they would have used, and tried to use the right types of firings that would have been used to get the right result. It was an incredible experience. And I feel so grateful for my time down in St. John and all the opportunities that have come since then. It was a really incredible opportunity. And that followed my year at Whitefish Pottery, which was a very different learning experience, which was a very, busy production studio that we're fulfilling orders. And we have my job there was pulling handles and processing greenware and loading kilns. And sometimes if it was a busy season, it was, all right, you got 3 carts of, 80 chili bowls of handles to pull today, and they all got to look exactly the same. And so it was a very, very contrasting experience to have one right after the other. And I think variety is really good when you're starting out in your clay experience and clay career, to get a full range of what is out there.
Yeah, and because St. John is not the whole economy, but a lot of the economy is tourist driven. A clay center in a heavily tourist area is so different than, say, the Bray, where there's Montana tourism, but not the same amount of numbers. I mean, I guess people come out to fly fish in the summer in Montana, but it doesn't feel like a tourist area, where if you're on St. John, like in the busy season, it's busy. I mean, there's more cars on the road, there's more everything. Yeah. And then in the heat of the summer, there's very little going on because it's so hot.
Yeah. And I was there for a season. I did leave in the off season, so I didn't get to experience the quiet time. I left when the winds died. And so I saw the busy season, and was a part of that. And I think every time I've gone back, it's more or less been the prime season. I've been there in some of the slower parts, but mostly the busy season on St. John.
Not that we need to give the Virgin Islands a plug, but if people can go to the Virgin Islands, it is America's most beautiful, I think the most beautiful spot in the whole United States. It's just so in St. John is mostly national park. So there's,
good.
A lot of undeveloped land. It's really beautiful. It's amazing. So people should.
It's so good. And I think St. John, I think this still stands, but they have 2 of the top 10 beaches in the world, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Insane. But also, if you go, be a good tourist. Don't be a jerk. Do all the things that the local economy asks you to do. And don't be rude to people, all that stuff. Be a nice tourist, please.
For sure.
Yeah.
To wrap up, can you leave your website or how people could get in touch?
Yeah. So my website is Stephanie Seguin Ceramics, and Seguin is Seguin. And you can find me at Instagram at Stephanie Seguin Ceramic. No, Stephanie Seguin Studios. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Ben. This was great. This was fun to do, working with you in a different way. This was great.
For sure.
Yeah. Awesome. I appreciate it.
I'd like to thank Stephanie for coming on the show. I certainly appreciate and enjoy working with her at the Archie Bray. She's doing a great job in the education department, so I hope you'll check out some of the stuff that is happening at the Bray this summer, including Artist Amplified. That next one, as I mentioned before, is happening this week, so if you want to check that out with Joanna Powell, you can do that May the 16th at 6:30 Mountain Time. You can find out more at archiebray.org. Wanted to take a minute and thank our sponsors. We couldn't make this show without the generous support of folks like Cornell Studio Supply, the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art, and Bray Clay. If you or your organization is interested in being a sponsor on the show, you can get in touch at brickyardnetwork.org. I'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you all for tuning in.
If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.
This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.